This is Ryan Pierce, host of Completely Serious. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
What's up, everybody? This is Christian Heimel, host of Press Row here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, Press Row, where we talk about the biggest issues in sports with the analysts, experts, and reporters who cover them. No nonsense, hard-hitting interviews on the sports topics you're talking about. A new show comes out every single Thursday. And don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of Press Row. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Hey everyone, welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Elisabeth.
And we're here today with Brice Burge to talk nerdy to you. Our topic for today is the trailer for Ant-Man and the Wasp.
All right, and this is something I'm pretty excited to talk about. I don't really know that much about Ant-Man, admittedly, for whatever reason. When it came to Marvel in the comics, I was more into Avengers, Captain America, Iron Man, and the X-Men, so I never ventured much into Ant-Man. But I have watched at least the first MCU movie regarding him, so I am excited to kind of talk about this trailer that has just come out. So, Brice, I think you have a lot of different thoughts to talk about when you saw the trailer. So what are some of those?
Well, hello, and thanks for having me first off. It's an honor to be here, so thank you for that. But when it came to the trailer, I was initially really excited, and every single time that I've watched the trailer since, I've gotten either more and more excited or just completely deflated, because I feel like the way that they could take this movie could either redeem a lot of the problems that the MCU has had with some of their villainry, or it could just fall into this typecast inside joke type gag reel that isn't going to be entertaining for anybody, and I don't see a lot of wiggle room where it can fall in between. It's kind of that reverse bell curve where you're either going to have something really awesome or something really terrible, and there's not a lot of options in between there for where this movie could go.
Definitely. I kind of had similar thoughts when I watched Thor Ragnarok. There were a lot of moments where I thought it was just a little too miss for me. Just with the comedy and the timing and the subject matter at hand, it just kind of didn't always jive together well. So I really hope that they kind of take note of some of the things that didn't work with movies like Thor Ragnarok, and they kind of apply it to Ant-Man and the Wasp, so that, you know, this time around they can make it even better than the first Ant-Man movie.
Yeah, that's one of the weird things about it, is that Ant-Man is kind of like a low-key, polarizing movie. You either loved it or you hated it, and there was a lot of comedy and comedic aspects of that movie. And when you have some of the things that those actors bring, Paul Rudd, Judy Greer, who plays Paul Rudd's ex-wife, she's been on Archer and Arrested Development. There's a lot of humor that's there that can be developed into a really funny scenario that, when done right, can really play off of just how ridiculous Ant-Man is as a character. And it's really frustrating to say that, because almost the concept of Ant-Man has changed from when Ant-Man first in the 50s and all that kind of stuff, a real long time ago, to what Ant-Man is now, about a guy that shrinks down and rides ants. It's something whimsical and Alice in Wonderland-esque compared to some of the more dark or even technologically marvelous characters that the Marvel universe has. But that being said, there's this complex aspect of which Ant-Man at the time, that kind of stuff. So to play off with the Scott Lang version as Paul Rudd is kind of like the physical embodiment of a dad joke at this point. You know, like, it's not the best thing in the world, but you feel kind of, you know, it kind of gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling about it. definitely plays into that, especially with his role as being a father in these movies, and how much his kid means to him, and how much in the first movie family really had that aspect. I do expect it to come through, especially with, again, the Scott Lang storyline. It looks like they're going to try to take some of the Ant-Man Volume 2 series from 2015 to go towards this movie as well, in terms of having that child and having that family influence. But that being said, you don't really see it too much, besides the fact of, I've hurt the people that I love, and I make decisions that impact others, and you kind of have that team cap thought process of really, how do my actions influence others? And while that's there, and while there's comedic influences, it's all just really how they're gonna try to bring this together and make it an entertaining movie, because we've kind of seen family influences in Guardians of the Galaxy or Thor Ragnarok, and it seems like this time with the trailer, it's gonna be a heist movie. That's what it seems like it's gonna be. It's gonna be a heist movie. Out of all the things that you could possibly be as a movie, and I think that could be a really interesting take that really celebrates some of the dual storyline plots that the MCU has taken in the last, just really in phase 3 of the MCU.
I did want to say, I think that's interesting that you refer to Scott's character as a running dad joke. I loved that. I really do feel that too, and I'm interested to see how they're going to have this big broken family of the Marvel Cinematic Universe come together after this movie. I know that we're going to talk a little bit later on about where this movie comes in the timeline. I know they've made mention a few times of Civil War and where allegiances would lie with Wasp, and if she had been able to say yes or no that she would back Captain America, whether or not she would have said yes is this epic mystery. But I do think it's interesting that there currently is this broken family aspect of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's gonna have to come together with the Infinity War.
Yeah, ultimately that's going to be a really interesting aspect of this movie seems to be coming out after Infinity War, but before, time-wise, chronologically, before Infinity War, and I think that's a good thing. When you're looking at these movies in the overarching universe, you still have to show everyday life moving forward. I think that was one of the reasons why the greatest character development in Spider-Man Homecoming was the MCU, is because you finally got an opportunity to see how the everyday man was impacted by having superheroes all around. I think you'll have that here with Ant-Man too, because you're going to start seeing how the corporate side of things really impact this universe, and it's going to be done in a different way than, let's say, the Iron Man trilogy, where all three of those bad guys were corporate villains in one way or the other. And you're going to see that here too, because one of the things that we had talked about in our notes was, to kind of change off a little bit, was Walton Goggins' appearance in the trailer as Sonny Burge, and he's never actually in the trailers, like the feature of it, a couple of times. And Sonny Burge is a corporate bad guy that worked underneath Darren Cross across Technologies, applied for Secretary of Defense in the Marvel comic book series, but is a relatively new comic book character as well. He was created in 2003, so after a post 9/11 world, we're starting to see more corporate villainy starting to continually bridge that line between government and corporate aspects. And so the problem is that Sonny Burge is a bumbling idiot. He's never really come across as a person intellectually that can compete with a Hank Pym, that can compete with a Tony Stark. The guy can't even compete with an Adrian Toomes as the Vulture. It's really frustrating because he's a guy that just has money and he can blame lackeys and he stays in power somehow until ultimately there is an ending with that character, and I don't want to talk too much about it because one, I haven't read that comic book, but two, I don't know if it's going to go into spoilers, but there's a definite end of that character. And so when you start looking into that and you start seeing what's there and what's not there, the side plots of a family that's there, because it's just so segmented in that trailer where you don't know what time is with what and what aspects of the movie are there, because you've got the heist movie aspect with like the building the shrunken building as the football, and then you've got the rescue mission of the original Wasp into the Quantum Zone, and it's just it's confusing because you're gonna have family storylines throughout both sides of that, both about how Scott Lang's decisions impact the present day time, but also going back to the Quantum Zone to try to rescue the original Wasp. And so it's like fixing former mistakes with family. I feel like there's kind of like the new nicer Hank Pym compared to how controlling Hank Pym was originally when that character came out, or when the original Wasp was around, how one-dimensional that relationship was. It's very reflective of what they're trying to do in the comic books into a movie format and break it all apart. There's a lot of pieces that really need to fall into place here, and I'm not sure if they're going to be able to get it.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree. I keep feeling like I keep saying this, but as a writer, one of my biggest things is writing really good villains. And, you know, there are obviously different ways you can go about it. There are different kinds of villains. I have my own opinions about what I think makes a good villain, and I think, you know, probably lots of people have their own opinions that may agree or disagree with mine. But, you know, I am interested to see, you know, how this all plays out, because like you said, this Burge guy is not really supposed to be this, you know, this guy who is supposed to be able to connect with and compete with the other characters and the other superheroes on a certain level. So, you know, are they just going to radically change this character? Is he going to be Burge in name only, or is somebody else going to be pulling the strings? And that, I think, will be interesting to see. And another thing you had mentioned with the family aspect, that was one thing I was going to be interested to see in Ant-Man and the Wasp, is to see how much they'll expand into the quantum realm and Janet's rescue from the quantum realm, because, I mean, obviously in the previous movie it was pretty well established that it was like nigh impossible to get out of the quantum realm, and Scott Lang pretty much got out of there on a hope and a prayer and good luck, basically. So I'm curious as to how they're going to then script her getting out of there. And one of the things I really hope is that they're not going to just have this random MacGuffin. I hope they're really going to actually delve into it and not just gloss over her return, but, you know, really get into the specifics of how she has returned, as well as, you know, address the obvious issues that she's going to have once she returns and adjust to life, you know, outside of the quantum realm, which is vastly, vastly different than, you know, regular day-to-day life.
Yeah, definitely. And there were a lot of things in the original Ant-Man movie that showed exactly what the quantum realm can really do in terms of disrupting a person's sense of time while there. So, I mean, we know that she's going to be played by Michelle Pfeiffer. And Michelle Pfeiffer, I think, was a really good casting move, especially for a lot of the older fanboys that remember her as Catwoman. She's got a little bit of a comedic tinge to her, where she does a lot of roles, but she can do comedy as well. So I think she's a good fit for the movie. I think it was a really good casting, which we've hinted at, and we'll probably discuss further on in the show about how much we love and hate different casting decisions. But it's interesting to me because it isn't clear in the trailer what's going to be plotline 1 and plotline 2. Because in phase 3 of the MCU, and we've seen this in a lot of the recent ones is that to break up the traditional superhero storyline of defeating a bad guy that has similar powers and backstory to the hero, they've kind of fit in a different movie in some way or the other. The Planet Hulk storyline coming out in Thor Ragnarok created a buddy cop drama, while also creating like a Great Escape type deal. You had Spider-Man: Homecoming, where it seems like if John Hughes directed a superhero movie with the Brat Pack from the 80s. Guardians of the Galaxy was more of a family development, almost a road trip type movie compared to like a big superhero space flick. So there's lots of intersecting lines, and even most recently in the Black Panther, that entire South Korean storyline, it almost looks like the exact same casino from Black Panther as it was in Casino Royale. That was a Bond movie interlude there in Black Panther, so you don't know what they're going to do in terms of, is the heist movie concept in present day really the number one focus, or is it rescuing the original Wasp from the quantum realm, and what one is going to take precedent? And you have to be able to balance it out, because it works like bookends. Your plot line one has to be resolved, and then there's like this trip in between. There are some really interesting ways of like going back and getting the original Wasp that would help out, especially with developing Goliath as a character. That's Lawrence Fishburne in this one. I'm really glad that they're not getting into a lot of the complications of which one is Goliath or Black Goliath as he was designated for a while there. It's just Goliath as Bill Foster as Lawrence Fishburne type deal. And so I think that's going to be a really good way in. And I think that was a good casting too, and we'll probably talk about that later. But there's so many different things here. It's going to be interesting to see which one is the balance, which one's going to be more important in the overall storyline. And I think it's going to be the heist movie instead of the rescue. I think the rescue is going to be your Planet Hulk type interlude instead of the focus of the movie.
Oh yeah, and I agree with that, especially if the trailer is any way to take how they're setting this up. I watched the trailer several times. I really can't see how they, interjected much of the original Wasp in there. It was really more focused on the whole, like you said, the whole heist movie setup. And I hope that's not, like a bait and switch kind of thing, because obviously they could try to do that kind of thing, but I think that would leave a lot of people feeling flat, especially since they've, haven't really hyped up one part of the storyline and have really focused on the other in the trailer. So yeah, I think I definitely agree that's probably what they're going to focus on, and I just hope that in the meantime they give the whole Janet Van Dyne rescue the proper due and not just kind of rush it and then rush her reunion and rush everything else, and I just hope she gets her proper time in the sun, because one of my favorite things about the MCU that they've been doing lately is integrating a lot of female characters, a lot of female superheroes, and so I kind of hope that they keep up that trend of not only introducing them, but developing them well. The Marvel Universe in general has so many good female superheroes and female characters in general. I dare say I don't expect to see nearly even half of them on screen in their MCU, but at the same time, there's still lots of opportunities for a lot of female characters to come in, and I hope that they keep up with that tradition of, incorporating and diversifying their cast and their characters accordingly, because I think that just, is just a really good thing to do in general.
I agree with that. But I think one of the biggest things that a lot of people that are not true fans of the Ant-Man or are new fans of the Ant-Man that have not really understood or experienced firsthand the growth and fall of Hank Pym as a wife beater, as an abuser, as somebody that really took advantage of Janet like that, is big factor here. Moving with Scott Lang as Ant-Man this time around for the MCU is a big moment because it can take the most relatable and the most easily celebrated of the Ant-Mans to the big screen. And I don't think Michelle Pfeiffer's Janet Van Dyne will be as big of a push on her own compared to plot development for Evangeline Lilly's Hope Van Dyne. That mother-daughter relationship, especially after watching some of the parental story arcs on Lost, from where Evangeline Lilly really broke out as a star on that TV show, with some of the parental lines on there, I think she's going to be able to pull so much talent for that performance on how she reacts to seeing Janet Van Dyne, to rescuing Janet Van Dyne, and then paying it forward in the last act of the movie. And I think that's really good because when they originally wrote the character, Janet Van Dyne was she was a female superhero, but she was a stock. She was card stock. I mean, there's some interesting aspects of card stock in terms of its weight and its gloss, or if it's flat, or its color. But really, it's at the end of the day, it's just card stock, and that's the way that Janet Van Dyne was originally written. But now, with what we know about writing good female characters, whether they're villains or heroes or just supplementary characters to help the universe move along, we know that we have to give character development to women in these characters. And I think that celebrating Hope Van Dyne's character arc even more shows just how much Marvel, not just the MCU, not just Marvel comic books, just Marvel as a whole has come in terms of recognizing that you can't fix your past, but you can improve your future. And I think that's really going to shine through the character development of Hope Van Dyne in this movie.
I really hope so, because just to add one little thing in here, that was one thing I didn't really particularly like about the Ant-Man movie, and that was Hope Van Dyne's characterization. Just from the perspective of a writer, I get frustrated sometimes when it seems like when some people write women characters, they're either nice or they're mean. And there's not really a whole lot of in between, and there's a lot of subtlety, I think, that can be portrayed that isn't really seen a lot nowadays, or at least really ever that I can really think of off the top of my head. The female characters, they're nice or they're mean, and that's pretty much it. There's not a lot of variety, and I understand, obviously, she has her own issues. She's not going to just warm up to Scott right away, but I think portraying her the way that she did, I think they didn't really quite do her character justice, and so I hope that they kind of fix that in this movie, especially with her mom coming back. I hope that they portray her as more than just, she's just mean because she lost her mom and she had all this stuff happen to her, and I just hope that her character's done a lot more justice this time around.
I don't know how I feel about that, because I feel like in the original Ant-Man movie, she didn't get the screen time to really develop anything besides basic characterizations, and that's frustrating in one sense of the movie, because you want to see that development, but you shouldn't have development of a character just for the sake of developing a character. You should have development of a character to add to the overall arcing storyline, and they could not do that. I thought that between all of the female characters in Ant-Man, with even some of the stuff that the ex-wife, the daughter especially, brought to creating a female-friendly world for Scott Lang, and a female-driven world with having lots of women around that impacted and had an influence on his decisions, was a good start. And you don't want to necessarily say it like that because it sounds like it's not good enough. However, it is Ant-Man. That was the character being developed, and we know from on the outside looking in that we will have more storyline development and character development for Hope Van Dyne, specifically because of things like Comic-Con interviews and stuff like that, where they decided not to put the Wasp in Civil War because there would have been not enough character development to make her a likable character in that movie. It would have just been an extra thing that would have would have added a lot to the scene. That fight scene of a Civil War that had 9 characters on it. But if you're already adding in Spider-Man, it's going to be really tough to add in the Wasp. But now you're comparing Spider-Man and the Wasp, and unfortunately, I think even if you're taking the gender aspects out of it, I think everybody's going to pick Spider-Man over the Wasp anyway, just because Spider-Man is such a more popular character. And so I'm happy that they kind of led her up to something that's malleable still, that's still creatable for her. And I think Evangeline Lilly as an actress wants that too, because I know that in some of the extra things that have been brought forward that she has had more influence on the character than others. And the first Ant-Man really showed that, especially with Michael Pena and Evangeline Lilly's characters. They really developed more because of their influence after the director change.
And I can appreciate that too, just the differences between the way the writers and directors take the different storylines and take the different characters. I can see that bringing in Spider-Man and negating Wasp in Civil War wasn't a bad idea, because you would want to give people a chance to get used to the idea of those characters being there. I feel like Spider-Man even made like a little cameo in a more recent movie as well after Homecoming. And I feel like that was really important to kind of warm up to him, to warm up to the Brooklyn accent, to warm up to that character. And now we're adding Wasp to the entire universe, and it's going to be interesting how they make these women characters into something different that you haven't seen before. So, we have some strong female characters under our belts already. We already know that there's Black Widow, and we know how elusive she is, and this past we know only so much about, and the way her character is just the way her character is. We've seen her for so long; she's just there. But adding new, different female characters, you have to make sure that they are different and that they stand out. And this really gives her a chance to become someone different, and for us to get used to all of the other characters, all the other women that are influencing Scott's character as well. So I think it's really important that you even mentioned all the female characters that surround him, that he's surrounded by them, and that they influence so much of his choices, because he has a daughter and she sees everything too. So it's important to be a good example for her, but to also be his own man.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many aspects to this movie about growing female characters that I'm excited about it. It's tough for me sometimes to talk about this because I'm a guy, and it's still a struggle sometimes to talk about something that we really didn't prep about at all to break the fourth wall with the fans a bit, but it can be a struggle as a guy sometimes to know when it is appropriate to talk about equality on the screen, equality in character development, how to write these characters, and what to do about it if you know that you've really screwed one up.
Well, and that's what's interesting too, is you've got these. You have to make sure it's equal, but also there's such a influx right now of making sure we are empowering women and empowering whatever minority is being empowered in whatever universe, cinematic or otherwise. Not to get, we've been real intellectual with our talks lately. But it's important to make sure that the characters are developed well enough, but not overdeveloped as to negate anything else that's going on in the plot line, in the movie, in the heist, in the quantum verse, anything.
Well, I mean, one of the other aspects to strong female empowerment that Ant-Man and the Wasp brings to the table is by changing the gender of one of the other villains. We've alluded to who is the real big bad guy, but in this case, there's been a couple of features of an all gray, silver, weird looking human that can jump between walls and stuff like that. The character is called Ghost. It is portrayed in the comic books as a man. It is acted by a woman. The woman is, to make sure that I had it right, Hannah John Kamen, and she's done a bunch of different things, but is also a fairly new actress. And so, what she's going to bring to this universe here is a little bit more of the we don't care, we want the best in terms of casting. Whether or not it's going to turn out well based on the character of Ghost. He doesn't really talk that much. He doesn't have a lot of, the character's face is never really shown. There's a lot of different ways that this character could go out, and Ghost is a fairly new character too. Really in depth with corporate espionage, really a high-end mercenary type that doesn't do like the killing type, but like the stealing of intellectual property, which I think is a big overarching storyline of why Ant-Man was Team Cap compared to Team Iron Man, where like Cap in the MCU is very, very libertarian, like small L, not big L, libertarian, in terms of protecting intellectual property rights, protecting your own rights, celebrating and fighting for your rights. That really comes out strong in somebody like the Pyms and the Van Dynes and even Langs, where you try to fight for what's yours, and you bring that corporate espionage aspect in there. It really makes it confusing to figure out who the big bad guy is. There could even be another big bad guy in here that is completely somebody else. It could, they could make Goliath a bad guy. One of the other big casting aspects of this movie was Randall Park, and he's not in the trailer at all. And he plays Johnny Woo, and Johnny Woo has a very, very in-depth background that deals with Red China and deals with the West Coast aspect of Asian influence in the Marvel universe that Iron Man 3 didn't really touch on, because a Fu Manchu wearing villain is a very, very touchy thing to kind of get at, but then it ends up switching around and being another corporate bad guy. And you could have that here, where you're not sure who's the real bad guy, who's setting up the guy pulling the strings to take for themselves. I think there's one really interesting thing about that could save a couple different movies, but the last time where we weren't really sure who the big bad guy was that dealt with corporate espionage was Iron Man 2, and that dealt with Justin Hammer, played by Sam Rockwell, and Mickey Rourke's Whiplash. And the back and forth of that was so poorly done that it almost derailed the whole MCU, and it was one of the worst use of a villain in the MCU, even worse than to waste those actors. I think it was terrible. I mean, your worst actors being wasted is probably Mads Mikkelsen as Malekith from Doctor Strange, or Christopher Eccleston, one of the doctors, as just a no-name dark elf from Thor 2, which is one of the other worst MCU movies. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they all play off of each other, and who decides to be the big bad guy, who doesn't, what kind of loop arounds, and who does what in that heist movie setting.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, you mentioned Iron Man 2 and Thor the Dark World, and those are definitely, one of a couple of the movies that I don't quite enjoy as much, just because just the whole plot lines, I think they sometimes try to do things that are a little too complicated, and they don't really balance it out very well. there is a fine line. I think I definitely think that audience moviegoers should appreciate and enjoy movies that are a little more intellectual, but at the same time, there is that point where it's just too complicated, and there's really only so much you can do in one movie, and when you try to do too much, it just becomes a mess. And so I hope they kind of take to heart the things that haven't worked in previous MCU films and kind of apply it, and when they move forward with these other movies, because that could really be a good learning experience, I think, for them with what hasn't worked so far, because they're in the MCU movies haven't all been perfect. There have definitely been misses, and I think that it's just important that they learn from that and move forward instead of continuing to make the same mistakes over and over.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think that they can do, and they did this in the first Ant-Man as well, is really starting to fix some of the corporate bad guy issues that the Iron Man trilogy brought forward. I mean, the Obadiah Stane, the original Iron Man, was great, but then Iron Man 2 was terrible, and Iron Man 3 had a really gutsy gotcha switcheroo instead with the Mandarin. The problem is that there's been Easter eggs in other movies, including the original Ant-Man here, that refer to 10 rings, that refer to actual terrorist organizations, where they could bring back the Mandarin later on if they wanted to, like the real Mandarin, not the fake Mandarin, or they could do something else. I know for me, what I would love more than anything in the world to fix this whole scenario with corporate villainy is to bring back a post-credit scene where the big bad was really Sam Rockwell's Justin Hammer. And Hammer Technologies was a competitor with PIM Technology as well as Stark Industries. And they were a bad guy corporate entity, kind of like AIM was in the third Iron Man. And we've seen where they can swap out entities and have one bad guy for this and one guy affiliated with that, because there is so much mixing and matching in the Marvel universe anyway, that it's not that hard to comprehend that it's one thing over another. But I'd love to see Sam Rockwell back, and I think they almost have to, because before the Sony acquisition, there was a lot of questions about whether or not there was going to be enough bad guys to really make things move forward and to have a longer experience once these actors started being changed out and replaced with other versions of the characters. And corporate villainy was one of the things that if they got it rectified, they could get a lot of development, a lot of interesting things out of it. And we kind of saw that in the first one. We kind of saw that with Damage Control and the anti-Tony Stark the standpoint that Adrian Toomes had, the Vulture did in Spider-Man Homecoming. This is an entirely different universe, but this universe has a stock market. This universe has a government. This universe has the ability for people to go out and follow the American dream and make it big by developing and inventing some product. And they've shown that in even the earliest flashbacks of the first Captain America movie back in the 40s. They've shown that they're able to do that, and that there are some American ideals that are there. And corporate villainy would be a great thing to bring back, especially with Iron Man, especially, if they go to a new Iron Man, especially if they want to bring back Tyne Daly as the leader of Damage Control, if they wanted to think of bringing back Hydra and how, because that's one thing that they've done well is the political thought process of like, all right, well, Robert Redford's character is going to be a bad guy, and he's always there, and I forget the actor's name. He's a character actor and everything, but he's a politician. He's a senator, and he was a secret member of Hydra. Like they did a good job with that. That's the public side, like the government side. They still need the private sector to really develop the MCU as a whole and to have the full fleshed out version of what they wanted to do and the economics of what Ant-Man and the Wasp, what a heist movie could bring, what with the intellectual property aspects of corporate espionage could really do, I think could really, really add to the overall intellectual thought process and smarter movies coming in to help the MCU out in Phase 4 or even a Phase 5 if they get that far.
Oh yeah, I think those are really great points. I just want to ask, is there anything else really pertinent you want to add?
Randall Park. That's got to be it. Randall Park, if you are not familiar with Randall Park, he is the dad off of Fresh Off the Boat, which is an ABC series. And going back to our talk earlier about empowering people, Fresh Off the Boat is the first television show to be focused on an Asian American family in over 20 years. So Randall Park really brings in a lot. The guy is funny as all get out. If you get a chance, look up the epic rap battles or whatever that show is on TBS, where he raps against James Van Der Beek, and it is the funniest thing that you will ever see. But he plays Jimmy Woo, and Jimmy Woo is an FBI agent. He's part of SHIELD, but he's also connected to Atlas International, which is kind of like communist Hydra in a lot of ways. I don't know. That's not really a fair comparison, but it's the best that I can really come up with. It just seems like that character could be really, really big in terms of developing something further, or even connecting the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. television series more with the MCU, in terms of what that can really bring, because I could see Randall Park popping on there. I could see him fitting in well with this movie. I could see him and his connection to things like Yellow Claw and some other more obscure villains that they have rights to into the fold for future phases. And I just feel like it's an overcasting. It's like Glenn Close and John C. Reilly with Nova Corps in the first Guardians of the Galaxy. It is an overcasting because this guy's career is on such an upwards trend. And I think that he could really add a lot to the table. And it'd be interesting to see what they do with this character.
Oh yeah, no doubt. It'll be really interesting to see, where they go with these characters and, the storyline in general, like we've been talking about the two storylines coming out, one by one, and how they're going to handle that and everything. So I'm really excited, and I hope, everybody listening is excited to see Ant-Man and the Wasp. I just wanted to say thank you for being with us today, Brice, to talk about Ant-Man and the Wasp, which will be released in theaters July 6th. And for everybody listening to us, talk nerdy to us. What's a fandom or a topic you'd like to hear about from us? You can find Beauties and Headcanons on Facebook, Twitter, and Tumblr to share your nerdy topic suggestions, and subscribe to this podcast and others from Public House Media on iTunes, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and wherever good podcasts are found.
We do love feedback, so if you liked this episode, or even if you didn't, please give a rating and a review so we can keep making great episodes for you. And share them if you'd like to as well. I'm Lindsay.
I'm Elisabeth.
And I'm Brice.
And thanks for getting nerdy with us on Beauties and Headcanons.